Nitro Rad.
It's late 2008. My 13-year-old self is sitting alone in his room browsing through the additional content of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Remember the Chronicle? It was a list of every single Nintendo published game on every Nintendo system as of 2007. A lot of people ripped on it for being completely pointless, but I often found myself scrolling through it looking at the insane amount of video games Nintendo has published over the years. And then I saw it. They made a sequel to StarTropics? I rushed to a computer and Googled it, finding gameplay videos on YouTube. I couldn't believe it! A sequel to my most cherished and loved game from my youth. At the time, I didn't know about emulators or how to order things online, so there I was, stuck without a way to play it. The following day, I got that week's Nintendo newsletter in my inbox, and I'll be damned. StarTropics 2 is now available for purchase on the Wii Shop channel.
That's how I found out about StarTropics 2. It was kind of crazy getting the email the day after I found out the game even existed. I don't know how it happened, but that's what happened. A couple of years later, I was lucky enough to score a mint condition boxed copy from a friend of mine. He said that his father found it in a trash dumpster. Like a dumpster. Someone threw this in a dumpster. I guess they thought the game was really bad? Even weirder, this game was made by the Japanese, but it was never released in Japan.
Like StarTropics 2, Zoda's Revenge, was created by a Japanese team within Nintendo of America, so it actually wasn't developed in Japan, but it was still developed by the Japanese. That really blows because that means Japan totally missed out on two of the best adventure games on the NES. StarTropics 2 released on the NES 4 years after its predecessor. That landed it in March of 1994, 3 whole years after the release of the Super Nintendo.
You know, I always wondered why StarTropics never really took off and became its own huge franchise, and I guess that's why. Instead of developing it for the currently actually relevant Super Nintendo, they decided to make it for the ill-fated NES.
It was part of a campaign to keep the NES alive so Nintendo could make more money by selling 2 consoles at once. Games like Mega Man 6 and Zoda's Revenge were developed to help keep the NES's library from going stale, along with that top-loader version of the console being released.
Cash the checks and get the NES!
Unfortunately, because of this campaign, StarTropics was doomed to slide into obscurity. I mean, hell, even me, a huge StarTropics fan as a kid, never heard of the sequel. Had it been on Super Nintendo, that might not have been the case.
But regardless of what happened, the end result is this: StarTropics 2, Zoda's Revenge for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let's load her up. Remember how StarTropics had that amazing and beautiful title screen? That vast 8-bit tropical landscape that fades to nighttime, unveiling a star-filled sky, followed by BAM, the game's logo. Well, StarTropics 2's isn't nearly that exciting. It's just a simple black screen with the logo on it. I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but this cover is pretty bland. Though the game compensates by having that book open up for us, giving us some character bios and backstory. The file select screen is identical to how it was in StarTropics 1, which in itself was identical to the file select screen in Zelda and Zelda 2. Funny how that is. Once you start the game, you're then greeted by Mike Jones, who apparently loves hanging out by brick walls. He even has the decency to ask you how you've been after he introduces himself. He then asks if you remember his uncle, Dr. J.
Well, yeah, of course I remember your uncle. We spent the entirety of the last game trying to save him.
Nope. Maybe you should read the manual? I love how this game treats you like an asshole if you act like one. For real though, this is back when game manuals were awesome. So if you happen to have it, take Mike's advice and read it. You get even more backstory for the game, along with those stupid names for the enemies that I love reading. Apparently that's a snowman, and that's a bandit? Anyway, Mike explains that Dr. J is still trying to decode the cipher we found in the pod crash. He then receives a telepathic message from Mika, one of the Argonian children we saved in StarTropics 1. No, not those Argonians. She explains that her father spoke to her in a dream, giving her a vital clue as to how to solve the cipher. Mike brings this info back to his uncle, who then decodes it into a magic phrase. Mike chants the words, and uncontrollably, he's thrown back in time. That time travel sequence is ridiculously rad. We now find ourselves back in the time of the cavemen as we get a taste of gameplay for the very first time. The overworld segments are exactly the same as they were in StarTropics 1. Walk around, talk to people, figure out where to go, and go there. However, now there's pits that you can fall into that'll bring you to a brief action sequence. It's almost like random encounters in an RPG, except instead of having an RPG battle, you just gotta navigate a small dungeon. You'll first run into one of these on your way to the caveman village. Completely bare of weapons, you'll have to find some rocks to throw at your enemies. Okay, if Mike's supposed to be an ace pitcher, then why can he only throw a rock a couple of feet in front of him? Gameplay in StarTropics 2's action segments have seen a dramatic overhaul. Mike's no longer confined to 4-way gridlocked movement, but instead can now move in all 8 directions. Mike can also now attack diagonally as well. Pro tip, the enemies are still locked to the grid and cannot walk diagonally. This means attacking them at an angle often gives you an advantage. Though one disadvantage with this kind of control style is now that whenever you want Mike to simply face a certain direction, he'll take a small step in the direction that you tap the D-pad. This makes it slightly harder to aim at stuff without moving around too much. It's kinda weird because this problem was addressed specifically in StarTropics 1 by requiring you to hold the direction for an additional amount of time to actually move Mike that way. It did feel a little bit awkward at first and took getting used to, but it did work in the long run. Ditching this concept though does make the game a little more accessible, and to some, it would make it feel a lot easier to move Mike around. The way I see it, it's different. It's not better or worse, it's just different. It's a new game and the developers tried something new. Overall, the gameplay does feel quite a bit different, but it still feels like StarTropics.
And if you ask me, that's exactly what a sequel should be like.
Once in the caveman village, Mike obtains his first primary weapon, a stone throwing axe.
So we went from yo-yos to axes. It's a pretty big leap.
Honestly, a yo-yo made a little bit more sense since it's on a string and it comes back to you. In this game, Mike just somehow has infinite axes that just disappear after being thrown a few tiles. Do I care? No, not at all. It's a video game, for crying out loud. I just thought the yo-yo was a little bit more of a fitting weapon. Now it's time for the first real dungeon. StarTropics 2 doesn't waste any time before it starts throwing the heavier enemies at you. Due to the increased level of mobility and the angles at which you can attack, the battle system, if you can call it that, is quite a bit more in depth, and it feels a lot more like a dungeon crawling brawler, kind of like Binding of Isaac. Platforming has also been completely revamped. While in StarTropics 1 it was mostly automatic and just a matter of choosing the direction you wanted Mike to jump, StarTropics 2's platforming is all done completely manually, like most other games. This means you're able to over and undershoot platforms, meaning you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful when jumping from tile to tile. It's kind of hard to keep in mind that you can still only make 2-tile jumps because, thanks to the new jumping system, it always looks like you can barely make a 3-tile jump. Once again, you'll find yourself hopping all over the buttons in the room to find hidden switches, though now you're able to just walk over them to find the correct one and then hop on it once you find it. It makes the whole process of finding and pushing hidden switches a lot less cumbersome. The presentation is about the same as it was in StarTropics 1. Visuals are fairly similar, but still manage to be unique enough not to feel like you're playing the same game. Though Mike Jones has a slightly different design. All for the better, because that new jacket he's wearing is rad as hell. Enemy designs range from familiar to totally different feeling. For example, they made the rats a lot more cartoony looking. Then again, they also made the snakes way more realistic looking. It's kinda weird how they swapped those two around. Music, while not as memorable as before, still has a handful of awesome tracks, my favorites being the standard dungeon theme and the boss battle theme. StarTropics 2 also has a lot more bosses than StarTropics 1 did, though now each one reflects the time period you're in. For example, in the caveman era, the boss is a fat dinosaur named Yum Yum. Once defeated, you'll find a mysterious item called a tetrad. In the Virtual Console version of the game, the tetrad was renamed the Block, which is a vastly less exciting name. It had something to do with Nintendo no longer having the rights to Tetris, but seriously, they couldn't think of a better name than Block? In the original version of the game, there's also a direct reference to Tetris where someone says, "Tetris is my middle name." In the Virtual Console version, this was replaced with "Puzzle is my middle name." Good, because if he said Block was his middle name, I'd be really confused. Mike then receives another telepathic phone call from Mika, who explains that the tetrads have been hidden throughout time and space, and it's now up to Mike Jones to track them all down and find them. You'll spend the rest of the game journeying to different time periods to collect each tetrad. Okay, this is my favorite thing about this game. Every time Mike is thrown to a different time period, he always yells, "Whoa, this is radical!" The following chapter, you'll find yourself in ancient Egypt, where you'll meet up with Cleopatra, the owner of the next tetrad. She agrees to give it to you if you get her a pizza? A pizza? We're in ancient Egypt and Cleopatra has ordered a pizza. Like a modern pizza. It's in the box and everything. Cleopatra has ordered a pizza. A pizza!
This game's got that really stupid, whoa, 90s sense of humor. And I love it so much.
On your way to find this glorious pizza, you'll chase a monkey through a hedge maze. I always thought this was a pretty neat part of the game. You can't see what tiles you can and can't walk through unless you step up onto one of these occasional platforms to get a brief vision of where you can and cannot go. It's almost like walking through a real hedge maze, how occasionally if you can get a peek over all of the bushes, you can get a brief idea of where you gotta go. Once caught up with the monkey, he teaches Mike a brand new ability, the power to shoot psychic shockwave blasts.
Jesus, slow down, Mike. You went from yo-yos to axes to psychic mind powers. He really is giving Ness a run for his money.
The psychic blasts do a little bit less damage than the axe, but they can be thrown a tad further and they have a higher firing rate. Some enemies can also only be attacked with a psychic blast too. I really like having the option between these two. They not only feel very different, but you never have a global reason to just always use one over the other. Certain situations might feel better with one, while others might feel better with the other. Though I have noticed quite a lack of secondary weapons. StarTropics 1 had quite a bit of them, but StarTropics 2 doesn't really have many at all. The only one I ever found helpful was the three-way shot, which is a spreader of sorts that you can cover a wider range with. There's also considerably less magic items too. StarTropics 1 had tons, like the snowman that would freeze everything on screen and the rod that made invisible enemies visible. But StarTropics 2 only has a magic flute that you use once in the entire game, and a magic star that'll make Mike temporarily invincible. Potions make a comeback, and they're just as useful as ever. With the higher levels of combat in this game, you'll find yourself using them quite often. StarTropics 2 is quite a bit lighter on puzzles, but instead focuses quite a bit more on platforming. There's several platforming segments that'll require some precise jumps to make it across. These can prove pretty challenging, at least until you get the hang of the new manual jumping controls. StarTropics 2 also has a much higher emphasis on combat, which can be a bad thing if not done well. But to complement this, there's a lot of really cool new enemies introduced. Later in the game, there's groups of ghosts where you can only defeat them by destroying the off-colored one. There's also a ghost that you can only hurt by attacking the tombstone he's carrying on his back. I don't really know why, but I really like this character design. The thought of a dead guy carrying his tombstone on his back everywhere he goes is, I don't know, I just find it really interesting. As you journey throughout the game, your two main weapons will both see some upgrades. The axe will be replaced with throwing daggers and then swords. Though Mike doesn't use the swords the way he's supposed to, he just throws them at things. The psychic shockwaves upgrades are very similar to the yo-yos. It'll downgrade if you go under a certain amount of hearts and then upgrade again once you have enough health to use it. Though this time around when your health gets too low to use your best weapon, you now have the swords as a failsafe to rely on. It's a really nice balance that StarTropics 1 didn't quite have. Though one thing I hate about this game is that once your health is too low, the game starts beeping at you to let you know. Not only that, but every time you hit a button, it beeps again, so you get to suffer this erratic frequency of annoying beeping until you get more health. StarTropics 1 also had this, but the sound effect it used wasn't nearly as ear-grating.
And if you thought the beeping in Zelda was bad, you haven't seen anything yet.
StarTropics 2 is a little bit longer than StarTropics 1, having 9 chapters total. It focuses much more on dungeons than it does overworld puzzles like StarTropics 1 did. There's a couple of mazes like I mentioned before, but the only real puzzle overworld part of Zoda's Revenge is when you're in the Wild West and you have to interpret a guy's song as the coordinates to place some dynamite. It's a pretty cool puzzle, and I don't really know why they didn't have any more of these. As the title implies, Zoda is back. And not just once, but 3 times. In this game, you'll fight Zoda X, Zoda Y, and Zoda Z. It's kind of unclear whether these are different forms of Zoda or if there's literally just 3 more Zodas, but either way, it's time to kick some alien scum. You'll fight them in a number of different time periods throughout the game. I always loved it when you encountered the main bad guy numerous times throughout the game, rather than you only seeing him at the very end like you do in StarTropics 1. It makes the villain feel a lot more involved rather than, just sitting at the sidelines waiting for you at the very end. Zoda's Revenge returns you to Sea Island towards the very end of the game, making you play through a redesigned version of the first dungeon from StarTropics. You also get to hear a pretty sick remix of the StarTropics 1 dungeon theme. It's an awesome homage to the first game, and it's super interesting to see how the same level plays with vastly different game mechanics. Oh, and remember how in StarTropics 1, after you beat the snake boss, you could find its skeleton in the next room? Yeah, apparently that thing wasn't dead. This has got to be one of the coolest boss returns I've ever seen. Before facing the final boss, you got to go through a boss rush. An incredibly hard boss rush. The room right before gives you a chance to stock up on potions for it, but even still, getting through boss after boss after boss is an incredibly hard task. But boy oh boy, when you finally blow through each and every one and lay the final smackdown to Zoda once and for all, the feeling of satisfaction is incredible. After reuniting with Mika, they put all of the tetrads together, and out comes Hirokon, the king of all Argonians, and Mika's father. He sealed himself away in the tetrads to escape Zoda. Now that the Argonian race is once again together at last, they can go and rebuild their society. As they blast away into space, Mike runs after them to no avail. It then freeze frames and rolls the credits.
The ending is really nowhere near as satisfying as it was in StarTropics, but even still, StarTropics 2 is a really solid game. Would I say it's better than StarTropics? I don't know.
StarTropics 2 has a very different kind of charm to it. It mostly comes from the stupid and lovable sense of humor. The combat's a lot more fun, and the new platforming is great too, but it just doesn't have the puzzle-solving aspect that was present in the first game.
I definitely wouldn't say it's a worse game, it's just a very different game. It's a different title that tries a lot of different things, and a lot of those things worked out really well. It's a fantastic sequel to an already amazing game, and if you're a fan of the first game, there's a lot to find and enjoy here. So I guess 1 year ago today I shoved bananas in my ears. I can't believe it's been a whole year already. So here's to 1 year of Nitro Rad, and here's to many years to come. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have yourselves a rad night, and take care.